I got part of the layout done. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I got these two structures installed, as well as this basic scenery done on this corner of the layout. You'll notice I also have retaining walls done. I have most of the road and concrete areas done as well, but that's going to be the subject of another video. So anyway, let's look at how I built this structure here and then got the two of them installed on this corner of the layout. So for this corner structure, I used the George Roberts Printing Company Walthers kit, and you can see from the picture on the box that structure wasn't going to fit the small corner space as it was designed for the kit. So I had to kit bash this and cut things down to size. So I laid everything out on my workbench and then just started trimming down pieces to fit the space that I had. For a lot of these, I would take a wall section, take it over to the actual place on the layout where it was going to go, and figure out the best place to cut it. I wanted to keep the wall panels pretty much whole, so I didn't, have a cut in the middle of a window and that kind of thing. And so the way the kit is designed, there's those concrete support pillars with the brick panels in between. And so I wanted to make sure all the cuts were going to be in a logical place so it would look realistic once it was built. So here you can see all the wall panels once I had them cut down to size. So the next step was to sand down all the pieces and fit them together and then start gluing them. And so I started with the very front section, getting some of those pieces sanded and glued together. And I just used some plastic bonding for the solvent to attach these wall panels together. So after the first few pieces for the front, I worked on one of the larger angled pieces, getting that roughly glued in place. And then for the largest panel, I taped that in place onto the corner and then added some glue onto the interior of the joint. The structure at this point was still kind of floppy since I didn't have the one side complete on it yet, and I decided to just use a piece of blank styrene for that wall side because that was going to face the exterior of the layout and be placed up against the wooden side of the layout, so there wasn't really any need to use an actual piece of the kit for that side, so I figured I might as well just use a piece of styrene and then save the remaining wall pieces from the kit so I could potentially use those on a later project. Now this wasn't going to be a perfect fit from the start, and I knew that, but I wanted to get it roughly cut to size and then kind of work with it and get the final trimming done once I had everything at least partially assembled. I had to notch out one corner to fit the different elevations of the structure in that area, and then got it to where it was pretty close to the proper size. I then taped all the pieces together and worked on getting some of the roof sections cut out as well. So for the small roof section on the front part of the layout, I used one of the actual roof sections from the kit, cut that out, and then cut it down to size to fit that little square. And the main idea of doing this little one first was that because I wanted to have that as a almost perfect square, that would actually help obviously align all the wall sections to make sure I had 90-degree corners there and kind of set the stage for the remainder of the structure. So I got that piece cut and trimmed to size, put it in place, and then applied solvent to securely attach it. With that first part done, I was able to go around and add a little bit more solvent on some of the joints to kind of get them stiffened up a little bit better. And then I placed the structure upside down on another piece of styrene so I could trace from the inside the outline of the roof section for the main part of the structure. Then I just cut out along my lines I had traced, and I had a roof that was pretty much the proper size. I did have to make some very slight trims to get everything to fit properly, but once I did, everything fit almost perfectly, and I was able to get that glued in place, which obviously dramatically increased the overall strength of the structure. I used some tape to help hold everything tightly together as I applied the adhesive, and then let that stay on there for a while as everything dried. To strengthen each of the corners, I just took leftover pieces of sprue, cut them down to size, and placed them in each of the corners to help really strengthen the overall structure. Now, the construction of this building, as you see it at this point, actually occurred 3 months before I'm editing this video, and I couldn't seem to find all the video of me doing the original painting for the structure. So I'm showing you a reenactment of me spraying everything with black paint and then brushing on the gray paint that I used for the original mortar color. So here's a structure with that grayish mortar color already painted on the entire structure. And so then I mixed up a couple colors of brown and maroon to make the brick color that I wanted. And then I just took a brush and almost dry brushed everything. It was obviously heavier than a dry brushing would be, but I did get a lot of the paint off the brush, and so I was just gently sweeping it across the structure walls to try to highlight the tops of the bricks but not get the paint into the mortar joints. Overall, I think this technique worked out a little bit better than the ones I used for my other structures where I painted the brick color first and then applied a thin wash for the mortar. Next, I had to paint all the concrete pillar sections for the structure, so I mixed up a couple colors of gray, a little bit of kind of a tan color, tried that, and it was a little bit too yellowish looking for me, so I added more gray until I kind of got it to the color that I wanted. And then I just hand brushed all of the concrete areas on this structure. Now I could have just masked off all the brick areas and spray painted it. However, I decided that I didn't really want to do all the masking because there'd be a lot of cutting. And the way the structure is designed with the brick areas recessed below those concrete pillar areas, it would be pretty easy to paint by hand just because if you just slid the brush kind of sideways along those pillar areas, you wouldn't really get the brush on the bricks because there was a little bit of an elevation difference. So it was pretty easy to hand paint all those concrete pillar areas on the structure all the way around. And you can see here pretty much how that came together. So with the painting done, it was time to work on details. So I recently had a video on this Kokoni 3D printer, and I used that to make all of the roof and wall details that I used on this structure. So I did all kinds of roof vents, HVAC units, wall vents, electrical boxes, power meters, all those types of details. And I added those onto the structure in different places. So you can see the electrical boxes, the wall vent there, all the roof vents, and the different HVAC units on top of the roof to kind of really round out the structure and have that roof detail that you would expect on a structure like this. So you couldn't see through the structure. I just used some black construction paper, cut it to size, and then placed that inside the interior of the structure so you couldn't look through from one side to the other. And so here you can see it glued in place on the layout. I just used some wood glue on the structure. The one wall that is up against the wood side of the layout was glued quite thoroughly. And then I just put glue along the other backside, which was next to the retaining wall, and the various base edges, and pretty much just stuck that in place, added some weights on top to hold it in place while the glue dried, and it was good. So the other structure I got in place was one that I had showed a video on quite some time ago, and that was another kit bashed Walthers kit. And so this one I had already cut to size, but I needed to get those retaining walls done first before I could glue that structure in place. So since I had finished the retaining walls, and again I'll have a video on that coming up along with the roads, I was able to glue that structure in place. To make the structure a little more solid, I filled the entire interior of the structure with pieces of foam. So I just put a bunch of wood glue on the base of it, along with the edges, and then just put that in place on the layout. To make sure everything would stay secure while the glue was drying, I added different weights to different parts of the structure, and then wiped up any of the excess glue that was oozing out from the edges. There was still a gap along the back of the structure between the roof and the retaining wall, and so I just took some pieces of styrene and cut those to size so I could put those along that back edge and hide the gap that was in place there. I glued those in place with some super glue and then just added more weights to the structure until everything was fully dry. And while the glue was drying, I decided to paint all the rail for this front side of the layout. So I just used some rail tie brown and painted all the rails on this front section of the layout, and then wiped off the excess paint from the tops of the rails with some alcohol wipes once I had finished painting that area of rail. At this point, the glue on the structure was pretty much dry, so I just took all the weights off and painted those styrene strips that I used as a filler in the back. I used a gray color that was more or less a close match to the roof color of the structure. I decided at this point to complete the scenery on this corner of the layout, so I brushed on some full-strength white glue along the edges of the Kato Unitrack as well as the surrounding wood areas so I could put down my base layers of scenery. And I realized at this point that when I was putting in the scenery along the edges of the first structure in the corner there, that the glue had actually seeped down and sealed that section of the lid to the bottom part of the layout. So I had to take a knife and cut through that joint so I was able to actually lift up the lid. And so that wouldn't happen again, I just took some painter's tape and put that in place along the edge of the top lid so none of the glue would seep between that and the bottom edge of the layout, gluing the top down to the bottom. So with that done, I poured on a layer of my dirt mix I typically use, and then added on ballast and then some ground foam along that whole area there. I sprayed everything down with some rubbing alcohol, and then added on a diluted mix of matte medium to glue everything thoroughly in place. Now while I was cutting through that joint there in the corner, I did, with my hand, end up bumping out one of the windows on that corner section of the structure. And so I decided to just cut that roof section off. And so I wouldn't knock out any more windows in that section. I took some pieces of foam, wrapped it in black tape, and then just stuffed it down that front part of the structure so it would be pressing up against the window pane. So if you press in on the windows, you might still break the joint, but there wouldn't be space for them to fully push in and fall into the interior of the structure. So with that done, I put the roof section back in place, added more solvent, clamped everything down, and let everything dry, and everything was pretty much the way it was originally. And then to finish out that scene, I came back and added some pieces of fine leaf foliage as well as a few more clumps of grass around that structure and kind of finish out that scene in the corner of the layout. So anyway, things are going to progress pretty fast now on the remainder of this layout build. But that's all for this video, and I'll leave you with some trains running.